Okay, so I had a question from a viewer of one of my videos. Thank you very much. And I didn't write down who it was, but I'm sure you'll understand. Wherever you are, thank you very much. And the question was about, could I do a video about how to train your brain for drawing facial expressions from imagination? So that's a very good thing to think about. And so I'm going to show you some simple techniques and starting points. I mean, it's a big subject, so I couldn't possibly cover it in one video. That'll probably be about 20 minutes. In fact, there's people who go into every possible minute aspect of this. Animators, cartoonists, even actors would know a lot about facial expressions, body expressions. But one first thing I'm going to introduce is that you have to think simply. So you think simply about expressions and you think of combinations. So what do I mean? Well, I mean that if you look at a face, this is a skull, of course, but where's Mozart gone? He's over here. Here's Mozart face. You've got three zones. And on the face, you've got the eyes, nose, and mouth. So there's like intake. Your eyes take in light, impressions. Air goes in your nose. Mouth is water and food. And when it comes to expression and cartooning, what you have to think about is, if you look at this, these are the basic first things to consider before we build up to the actual drawing. You've got your skeleton, your bones underpinning your entire body. It's the framework. So some of that is fixed. So all of this is fixed. You have your mandible, your jaw, which moves. And then you've got eye sockets and nose. Now, this upper strip where you have your eyes and eyebrows, which are elements of expression, eyebrows, eyes, mouth, and each of them break into things, like I just said. Like in this top strip, you have eyes, you have eyebrows that are movable, you have eyes that are movable. They're fleshy orbs within these sockets. So they have a range of motion, but they can't go anywhere, And it's the same for the mouth. The mouth has the jaw, which gets into expression a little bit. Like when you're talking or maybe you're yelling, you'd open your mouth, your jaw would open. The middle part, the nose, is fairly fixed, like the lines around it will move a bit. The nose might move a tiny bit, but it's essentially fixed. And so when you're considering expressions being combinations of movements and forms and shapes, and when it comes to cartooning, they're combinations of symbols, which I'll show in a minute, which are simplified, almost like signal flags, right? When it comes to that, you're thinking of different combinations of the movable parts. So, the eyes can move in different directions. Eyebrows can move up and down. And the mouth has all kinds of different shapes. The jaw can open and close. There's also, when you consider the mouth in terms of its elements, you'd have, like I said, the teeth are only opening and closing. The teeth themselves obviously don't move. You've got the lips, which can move in all kinds of ways. And you've got the tongue, which also is a big element in expression, or can be if you can see it, if the mouth is open. And then you've got, of course, the cheekbones here. When you have flesh on this, you've got the crease lines, which are affected by what's happening with the mouth. And of course, around the eyes too, you're going to have crinkling and so forth, because around here, the flesh is movable to some extent. So that's one thing to introduce, is that you've got these different elements, you've got the different zones, eyes and mouth. And next I'll get into combinations, symbols, and representation versus symbols. And I'm not even getting into further things about acting. Like, obviously, if you're doing an expressive character in a cartoon, you've got other elements, like you've got the body posture, you've got the head angle is going to affect your expression. Right now in this video, I'm just considering if you have a face-on head to start to think for yourself about what the different symbols are, and when you combine them, what different emotions you express, because it is like a complicated signal flag system. And you'll see what I mean in a minute when I get into this. But what you want to do, like I always advise in my videos, is teach yourself. Explain this to yourself very simply. Do not believe the mumbo jumbo that you have to have some complicated animation degree or something. No diss against animators, but I'm just saying you don't have to have like some complicated pedigree to understand this. It's really not that hard to understand when you break it down systematically. So let's move Mozart out of the way. Over here, I'm going to make this, let's do it this way, representation. Am I spelling it right? Representation and symbols. So these are both endless things, but this is almost like a spectrum. Think of like a gradation, a gradient between here and here. This is more realistic. It goes all the way over to simple symbols. So what do I mean by that? Like if you're drawing something realistically, like say an eye, like the classic drawing books will show, you know? Hopefully this is showing up. I'm going to zoom in. You might do it like this, you know, the three-dimensional thing. You've got the eyeball within. It's like a sphere. And then you've got the circle of the eye itself. And then you might have an eyebrow up here. You might ink it in quickly. Trying to do this quickly so we don't make a super long video, but all right, there's your basic eye. And I guess you could put some eyelashes if you want, but you don't always do that in cartooning. So that's realistic in its form. You're trying to get into form. You're using more lines. And over here, you could think of symbols. So that's more when you get cartoony, right? Like you might have just the eyes as dots. Things like eyebrows, you know, are just going to be like this. A nose might just be a weird form, whatever you want. And a mouth, again, can be just a line. It might be a couple of lines if you put the bottom of the mouth, but it's not an attempt to be more representational like this is. So this comes into play when you think about expressions. The reason I'm introducing it is because if you come from first being more of a comic book artist and you're concerned about like all the details and muscles and rendering, people, what they do is they focus very much on realistic representation and they forget about symbols and using symbols. And then sometimes it's the reverse, you know, someone who comes from this side of cartooning, doing, you know, Bigfoot cartooning, whatever kind of cartooning, where it's really just symbol-based. It's simple and symbol-based. The two words sound the same. They might forget all about the more realistic stuff and representing stuff. Now, it's just purely a choice about what you want to do, but I guess I'm talking about when you're in the middle or further over here, is that you need to remember to use symbols and to make your symbols clear, because they can easily get lost in a jungle of representation and you forget about what you're actually trying to symbolize, so that when the viewer looks at your comic book drawing, they can right away see, hey, what the emotion is, because it's hit the viewer's mind as being a clear symbol of like, oh, this is suspicion, or this is like, you know, jealousy, this is anger, this is love, this is just a nice smile, whatever. So that's easier to do when you know the basic symbols over here. You know, you just do frown, frowny face, you know, like the happy face is the classic one, obviously. The simplest possible representation. That's not a super happy face, but the next part to get into here is, got my little note here, is that the more lines you add, this is related to this, the more lines you add, the more complex it gets. So, and you move from, so if you just have cartoonists that do dot eyes, you have a very simple representation. It's just completely symbolic. The minute you start adding more lines, like you add a top eyebrow line there, you've got more possibilities of expression. And then, of course, if you add another bottom line, you can control the shape of the eye too, which has a part in the expression. And then you might even do an eyelid line. And you might, and sometimes in comic book drawing, you don't want to draw in everything like an outline. Like you don't want to make everything always completely, well, that even looks okay, but you not have to nail it in completely. Like when you get into comic book rendering, you might want to leave some gaps. And you could even add another line underneath, like if you've got a character that's got more of a, I'm adding an eyebrow here, but if you've got a character that's got more of a pouchy eye underneath there. But why does this matter? Well, it matters because when you just have dot eyes, you have a lot more trouble doing a look. Like how do you make the person look over to the side? You see there, you can't really tell. They're just shifted on the face. See, this is the face from the front. They've just shifted over. But the minute you add those top eye lines, you can tell, because it's defined the location of the eye socket, you now can tell that the person's looking over, right? And it's the same thing with adding more lines. Like if you wanted to do an eye where it's almost like this, you know, they're looking down a bit, and the lower lid can even come up if they're kind of squinting. You might put some lines there. Say it's a bit of an upshot. You know, like you have a harder time doing that if you don't have enough lines. So I'm saying that as you get more representational down here, you're adding more lines. You have more elements and lines to control and work with, and they need to work together is another thing to mention. So you're getting away from the symbolic. So you got to remember that there's still symbols. You're doing representation, but you're doing also symbols. Now I'll get into the next part. I'll just check my notes here. Checks notes. Well, one thing I'll say at this point too, and we'll get into the last part of this. One or two things is, this is very useful. It's just a basic shaving mirror, you know. You can buy them usually at the drugstore or whatever. And use it to look at yourself. And that's part of what I said a few minutes ago, is figure this all out for yourself. Like study your own expressions in the mirror and make the, you know, be the kook that's making the frowny faces, the happy faces. Twist your face around, and you learn a lot just by doing that. It's like self-study. You see the range of expression that's possible because each element of your face has only a certain amount of movement, unless maybe you're Jim Carrey. Like he has the incredibly rubbery face, but you know, eyebrows can only move a certain amount. Like when you've got eyebrows, let's zoom back in again. You know, they might go down and go up, or you know, sometimes like this. And you might have an eye line above the eye. And I'm drawing eyes looking over. And you know, you can get into adding, I'm jumping around a bit here, but you can add in extra lines too, but you don't want too many because you have to remember that they're symbols. And I always find a way to mention my kind of art hero and mentor, Alex Toth. He called himself a cartoonist, And it took me the longest time to understand, why is he still calling himself a cartoonist? I thought this guy was like very realistic and representational. But actually, when you look, he was using symbols too. All he was doing, though, not all, but a trick was that fooled people is, of course, he's drawing in more realistic proportions. He wasn't doing Bigfoot cartooning, but he was every bit a cartoonist as Karl Barks or something, just in a different style, you know, more realistic proportions, maybe more detail, more rendering and line work. But underneath it, he was trying to do cartooning. Anyway, I was talking about range of motion. So eyebrows have a certain range of motion. Mouths have certain range of motions, and you're going to get all kinds of different shapes and combinations of shapes, you know. So here I'm drawing like someone's yelling or something, right? Frowning, and the more dramatic emotions are probably easier to. Let's fix this guy's face here. And you can experiment, you know. Yeah, if you're doing it on a computer, just erase it, or if you're doing it on paper like this, you can retrace stuff. Is that showing? Yeah, it's kind of showing. You know, you trace it through again. So, okay, that's enough for that part. And I'll show you my last little bit here is, yeah, I said act it out yourself, feel it. He's checking his notes again. And feel comfortable. Or not feel comfortable, sorry. Act it out yourself, feel it, and then you will figure out the emotions yourself. And that's a thing that animators know is 9 old men, you know, the classic Disney animators, they said, act it out yourself. Like whatever you're doing, do the emotion, try and put it in your body, your face, look in a mirror, get a full-length mirror if you're doing full-length poses. It really makes a huge difference. Last thing is I've made one of these fun games here that you'd have almost as a kid. And what it is it's just a face straight on. And I've cut out these slots. And I've got eyes and mouths here. So they've got 2 strips of, where'd they go? These are the eyes. And these are the mouths. And these are by no means exhaustive combinations of them. I'll just move this stuff away. Not at all exhaustive. There's all kinds of other possibilities, but I had to limit it. And then I got my movable eyebrows over here. Oops. I'll get those on in a second. They're not showing on the camera. Anyway, so what I do is I'm going to thread 2 of these at once if I can to make it a little more time efficient. If my audience can just bear with me. See, I'm trying to do this all low-tech. I'm going to do them one at a time. I'm trying to do this kind of low-tech and fun. At least it makes it more fun for me because, you know, I could do these like super edited videos. And I'm doing this wrong. Okay, here we go. It's what happens when you try and talk and explain. I guess I'm draw-splaining. You could do it like with super edited videos and do cuts and stuff, but I don't really want to do that. I'd have only like 3 videos done, and I want to just do these chalk talk type things. Okay, so what I'm doing is threading this in. I've cut these little slots here, you can see. And this is going to go under the bridge of the nose. I've left the bridge of the nose and obviously the rest of the face because this is just an experiment with combinations. It's like those fold over, you know, card things that you could get. Where did all those things go? I guess we're all in the cloud now. We're living in the clouds. So all those fun things have gone away. But you can easily make something like this for yourself. Make any character you want, have fun with it. And I did this face on to keep it simple because it's really just meant to be an experiment illustrating the principle of combinations. For somebody who, like my questioner, who wants to think about, like, how do I make up expressions? It's like, start experimenting and playing, just like when you're a kid. So, what have I got here? I've got the eyebrows loose. I should probably find a way to pin them down. But this is a very neutral expression, right? Mouth closed. Oops, my other expression's coming in there. Let's just ignore that, people. Got my handy X-Acto knife here for cutting. Neutral eyes, straight on, nothing happening. Eyebrows it's a little frowny there, but hey, he's having a bad day. So you change one thing at a time and see what happens. It's kind of fun. Oops, that's the other eye. So now he's falling asleep, or he's looking down maybe. And you can just try anything you want, like within reason. Of course, you can't go like that. Well, most people's eyebrows would never go like that. So you've probably exceeded the range of motion for this kind of drawing. But you could have one lift up, or you could have them go like this. If you see that, see now the expression immediately changes to one of sadness, eyebrows up. They're really all like symbol flags. They're flags. And what about if I change the mouth, but I keep those two elements the same? Okay, so he's doing that, ho-hum, I'm going to smile. Not really happy, but I'm smiling. And you can see if I even change these a little bit, what do I get? See how interesting that is? And you can just play with the combinations and then figure out what the emotions are after, instead of doing it the other way around. Like, you don't have to figure out, oh, I want to draw suspicion, and then you got to like stumble around trying to figure out how to show that. You could either just look at yourself in the mirror, try and feel suspicious, or do that face. Or like, say, skepticism, you're being skeptical. You could do that yourself, or you can just experiment this and go the other way and just name them as they appear. So this is disapproval, because obviously when you have here's another simple thing to explain for a moment. When you have obviously, this is like basic stuff, right? You have mouths going up, you have happiness, neutral, and then when they're going down, you got frowny. And it's the same with eyebrows. When you go up, they're sad, neutral, and then you get into the frown zones, right? And then you have the thing of open versus closed. So open expressions are like when the eyes are open. I'm going to use my marker, it's easier to see. Sorry guys. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. Open mouth, right? And then closed would be anything, your eyes are like very narrow or closed completely. Mouth is closed. What it is you're giving off less information. It's squishing down. And the body does that too. If you see somebody very sad or defeated, they're crumpled down, they're in the fetal position, they're hunched over, the body's closing in. But then when things open, you have expression, you have more release of emotion and energy. So those are the things that will help you if you understand those basic principles when you're deciding, if you've got your comic book character, what emotions you're trying to show. I've lost my eyebrows here, a common problem. Let's go back to this Fred guy here. Let's call him Fred. We're almost wrapping this up, but you'll see. Now he's like, hey, well, what do you think about that? I know, cheesy voices. And then now he's surprised. He's like, and if you shift the mouth a bit off center, he's like, he's sticking his mouth over, like, he's like, And then, of course, you have proximity. I haven't even gotten into that, right? So eyebrows can go up and down. They can turn. One can go different than the other, right? So, and that gets into those eye lines, like above the eyes. If you use eye lines, you can also define that the gap here has changed. And I should note that in all of these, I haven't even really drawn the cheek lines. I've drawn some dimple lines in some of these mouths. But because it's a two-part thing and I've made this cutout, I haven't drawn a cheek line across. But I think you see the idea. Let's get the last set of eyes and mouths in here. And of course, I could cross-combine all these, but I think we'll just do a couple more. And where did my other... Okay, he's baffling himself with complication. The trials of a video YouTuber cartoonist. Trying to do a low-tech approach to teaching stuff. Low-tech but fun. And I feel like, feel like a bit like the Friendly Giant, you know, on his TV show. But wait, I'm aging myself because none of you, if you're younger, would know what the hell the Friendly Giant is or was. Anyway, onwards. Having fun. I'm having fun. Now, of course, note that I could make endless different eyebrows too. Different, you know, thinner eyebrows, thicker proportions, right? So this isn't what I meant when I said at the beginning. This is by no means exhaustive. But it's up to you to experiment. So now I've got different mouths again. And he's looking down and away. You know, you can have these different mouths. He's like got the cheesy grin, you know, and let's go back to looking over that way. He's looking at something. And see, a thing to note about eye direction is there's a whole thing about in cartooning about eye direction I haven't really even got into. But of course, since it's a straight-on drawing, we're not really getting into it. But when you have two characters interacting, then the line of connection between their eyes, it's another whole thing about acting that you have to get into. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this. But even with this, in terms of expressions, if you have a character looking at you and they're looking away, it's a bit evasive, isn't it? Or looking down and away, or this is like a squinty, kind of squinty, crinkly thing that the person's doing is like maybe a little bit getting into cheesy. So here's like either scared or disappointed. I'm having too much fun with this, really. This is like maybe pain or complaining or wincing, you know. And what this should do, at least it's doing it again for me, is kind of knock you out of your comfort zone, right? Like you get this habit, which is always going to creep back in, where you draw the same 10 or 15 expressions, or maybe less, 5, things that you know work, right? And they're convenient symbols. They may be mannerisms. They even become ruts. They're often things that you figure out work, and like it's your go-to thing. It may be things that you saw other people do that you at some point unconsciously adopted. But what you want to do is knock yourself out of that and try and experiment, right? And that's where the simple thing like this playing comes in. So you could even do this, of course, with a much wilder, cartoonier character. I like, you know, in my career, I've drawn a lot of sort of more of the realistic side, I suppose. But I love it all. I love cartooning and I love realism. And there's a whole zone of a spectrum in between the two. So again, I guess I'll round out back as I finish up here. I'll round back to the beginning that, you know, I put a little tiny bit of rendering here, if you want to call it that. More lines, you know, the hair. You could add more feathering on the face here. And that's getting you into representation. But my plea is that if you want to study expressions and work with them, you have to remember that they're symbols. And these are even slightly more complicated symbols because I've done a mouth shape. I've done a lower lip line. I've even done, I think this is called the philtrum. It's the nose, but you don't always need that. I've indicated the teeth. And in some of the drawings, I showed them the tongue, right? So the tongue can give expression too. Like whether someone's talking or whatever they happen to be doing, if you can see the inside of their mouth. And even the lower lip line you might need, because if they're pouting, you know, if you've got a character, say a cartoonier character, and they're like doing some kind of expression like that, or looking over this way. That's actually not super cartoony, but they're actually not pouting, so I kind of threw myself off there. But anyway, you see the point is you're using the lip for expression. You might even use the cheek line here, or if you have something like this. What I'm trying to do is play with very basic. That's more of a pout. And showing the eyes are squinting. That line's a little too much, but we're not erasing in these here parts. And you might even have the stretch of this chin, you know, he's like. So again, that's my idea, is think of it of combinations of symbols, and you get like a recipe like soup. Carrot, leeks, and potatoes and onions is different than whatever. Rutabagas and cabbages, whatever, you know? Everything's going to make a different flavor. So that's how you think of expressions. You're thinking of the zones, like the eyes, eyebrows, and mouth. You're going to think a bit of the jaw. And I didn't even get into things like camera angle, because the same expression seen from different angles and tilts can have also a different impact on the viewer. But hopefully that's a good primer or starting point. And if you have more questions, please ask, comment, like, subscribe. And thank you as ever for listening, and I hope that was helpful. Bye for now.